It's Friday early evening in Switzerland. It's Space Café Canada time. Our Space Café Canada by Dr. Jessica West will begin very soon. And we would like to thank ESA Space Solution for their great support for our event series. And as always, we really appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback, and we constantly learn and improve from the feedback that you give us. My name is Chiara Monter, and I'm the event coordinator at SpaceWatch.Global and host of the Space Café Benelux, together with my co-host Barnu Barzinghi. SpaceWatch is a Switzerland-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. And with Dr. Jessica West, senior researcher at the project Ploughshares, we have found a great friend and a wonderful host for our outreach in Canada. I know many of you are already familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and daily newsletters, and our Space Café podcasts. By the way, if you want to hear an amazing story, listen to the podcast episode of Brother Guy, the Pope's astronomer. It's an amazing version, so worth every minute of your time. We also keep our fan shop online open for you to support us actively and become a space watcher. Edition 1 has cool items for you, your friends, and the ones you love. And we need your support in order to keep our work alive for you. If you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive on our webpage in the events section and on our YouTube channel. And we will host our Space Café Canada live regularly. And with that, my job is done. And I would like to hand you over to your host in rainy Waterloo today. Jessica, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second edition of Space Café Canada. I'm joining you from my home, but also from Project Ploughshares, which is a Canadian Peace and Research Institute that has been engaged in global space governance discussions for almost 2 decades now. We're located at the University of Waterloo, and that is located on the Haldimand Tract, land that was granted to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River, which is also part of the territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We have a terrific audience today, and I do want to acknowledge that we have many of our American friends here, some of whom are celebrating at home as part of the brand new Juneteenth holiday marking the end of slavery that officially is marked on the calendar tomorrow. So thank you for being here with us today. I am honored to welcome my guest, Tim Kopra. Tim is probably a familiar figure to many space enthusiasts. He's had a remarkable career spanning many diverse roles, beginning with the U.S. Army, where he rose to the rank of colonel. He was an engineer and astronaut with NASA, which provided Tim the opportunity to fly not once, but twice to the International Space Station, the second time as commander. Today, he is here with us in Canada as the Vice President of Robotics and Space Operations at MDA, which is one of Canada's most successful space technology companies. You may know, but you may not know, that MDA is behind many of Canada's signature programs in space, including the famous Canadarm and the Space Shuttle and the International Space Station, as well as the Radarsat series of Earth observation satellites. MDA is also central to Canada's future space activities, which will continue to prioritize the development of space-based robotics and radar capabilities. So welcome, Tim. I'm so glad that you were able to join us.
Thanks for having me, Jessica. I'm really happy to be here today.
To get us started, I'm wondering if you could start by telling us more about MDA and its place in the Space Canadian ecosystem.
Yeah, for sure. So MDA has been around for a while. Most recently, it's become a public company on the Toronto Exchange, which is a really exciting development. We have 3 main business areas: Robotics and Space Operations, which is in Brampton, and that's my area of responsibility. We have satellite systems in Montreal, and then geointelligence, which is a combination of Earth observation and analytics out near Vancouver and Richmond. So in terms of, I guess the other part of your question, Jessica, was, where are we in the space industry ecosystem? I would say, especially for Canada, we're a central component. We provide capabilities that are really important to this burgeoning space industry. And within my area, one of the primary areas of focus is us contributing Canadarm3 for Lunar Gateway. And so this is Canada's contribution to an international effort to extend our reach for human presence beyond low Earth orbit and begin the return to the moon.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot, and that's very exciting for Canada and for me as a cheerleader and an observer. You mentioned Canada has a lot. Sorry, you mentioned that MDA has a long history here in Canada, and I want to note that it's made history in more ways than one. And I remember in 2008, I was writing about this at the time. It became the first company that the Canadian government blocked from a foreign takeover. And today, of course, it is owned by a group of Canadian investors. How important is it for Canada, or for any country really, to have a national private sector space capability? Is this changing as the space economy becomes more global, or does the focus on public-private partnerships make sort of national private industry capabilities even more important?
Well, I think from a free market standpoint, any growth is important, and around the ecosystem of any company, to include MDA, there are jobs and there are areas of expertise that get fully developed. So I think us going to be a private company from Maxar was a very important step, and a demonstration of Canada's growing capability when it comes to space. And then this next step of being a public company, I think it demonstrates that there's a capability for companies within Canada in the space industry to advance and to continue to grow. And that's one of our objectives actually with Canadarm 3 through the supply chain, is identifying companies that can help us in this really important program. And it would be awesome to see some of those companies that are part of our supply chain continue their own growth and be on the Toronto Exchange as well.
Yeah, so that was my follow-up question. This was a big deal to be listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. And what does that say about the trajectory of growth, not just in Canada, but I think the space economy as a whole?
Yeah, it is certainly taking off, and it's for a lot of reasons, in my opinion. It's almost like a new space race in many respects. There's the reduction in the cost of access to space. Technology has really developed. There's a lot of rallying around the Artemis program. Internationally, countries are interested in being involved. Just recently, New Zealand and South Korea signed up to the Artemis Accord. So lots of excitement, and a lot of that has to do around national prestige, but it's also a shot in the arm, because that means that the countries will be investing in space as well. And then we're seeing this increase in the things that space provides us. So you look at the Starlink satellites and increase in communication, and then the promise of us being able to service satellites in space, build infrastructure in space. And a lot of that has to do with that advancement of technology, national prestige, and decreased cost of access. So super exciting time.
It really is. And it's exciting to have you here on the show. The subtext of our talk today is really on robotics and whether robotics is the future of space exploration. So I'll guide us towards that topic. And, like many people in our audience today, I have children who are home, including a 7-year-old daughter who is incredibly excited that I'm speaking with a real live astronaut. I'm pretty sure everyone in her Zoom classroom is also aware of this by now. But that really puts you in a unique position because you're leading the development of robotics at a company that built the Canadarm 2 as well as Dexter. And if people aren't familiar with Dexter, it's described as the most advanced space robot in the world. But you've also flown with these instruments where they're used on the International Space Station. Can you speak to the role that robotics plays in human space exploration and what machines such as Canadarm and Dexter do and make possible for human spaceflight?
Yeah, for sure, Jessica. Something on the human side that I think is misportrayed in science fiction is that it's not that hard. It turns out that spaceflight is hard, and human spaceflight is even harder because humans are very high maintenance. We have to eat, we have to breathe oxygen, we consume products, we create waste, and all these things make us really not optimal for a lot of things that happen in space. Where we come in is We have this ability to process information in a way that cannot be replicated from a computer, not yet anyway. And so we're an important component in that loop. But to extend that capability is really ways that you can automate and ways that you can do activities in space that don't require a human, or at least can work in conjunction with a human. And space is a very harsh environment. It's a vacuum, wild temperature swings. There's atomic oxygen, which erode surfaces. And so with that harsh environment, instead of putting a person out there, let's use robotics to the max extent capable for those things where it makes sense. And so on International Space Station, the hardware that we supply and the operational expertise that we apply to that set of robotics is absolutely vital for maintaining the International Space Station. We're essentially the end-to-end logistics for a lot of the things that go on outside Space Station. Components break, or they need to be maintained, or there are things that need to be reconfigured, and a combination of humans and robotics is really the optimal combination. And as we go forward, whether it's Canadarm 3 that's going to be doing the logistics external to Lunar Gateway, or even some of these commercial efforts like Axiom, which is building a commercial space station, there's going to be a need for robotics in order to maintain and keep those stations operational.
Do you have any favorite anecdotes from the space station and the famous Canadarm?
Favorite anecdotes from Canadarm? Let me see. A few. My first time in space was in 2009. And so I was a hybrid crew member. I went up on Space Shuttle Endeavour on STS-127, and then spent 2 months on board as part of the International Space Station Expedition 20, and then came home on STS-128. So first time in space, you get trained up, but you're not completely used to space. And in our case, we had a very tight timeline because we were changing out batteries that were very important for the power on board Space Station, and in a very choreographed sequence of events. So we launched on flight day 1, we orbited flight day 2, on flight day 3 we docked, and I spent the night in the airlock, and the morning of flight day 4 went out on a spacewalk with Dave Wolf. And so going outside on a spacewalk, you open the hatch and then you see the Earth going past you at 5 miles a second, catch your breath, and then get to work. And as a new spacewalker, my job was relatively not complex. I crawled out and hooked up our safety tether lines, crawled over the top of the US lab and over the top of Space Shuttle that was docked to the front portion of station, climbed into the payload bay, and I was doing some reconfiguration as the Canadarm was coming down, grabbing enormous pieces of hardware and then lifting those out of the payload bay. So as I'm working, I'm turning over, looking over my shoulder, watching these massive pieces of structure being moved out of the payload bay with the robotic arm on Shuttle, which is like right next to me. And then watching that get handed off to the Canadarm 2, which is on the International Space Station on the mobile base system that is also an MDA product, and then installed like a huge piece of Legos. So really a phenomenal experience to be there watching all this, like participating in a science fiction movie.
And yet you talk about it, the way you talk about it sounds almost like any other Tuesday. And
it's surreal, Jessica, because you're doing something that you're trained for, but not in that environment. And so you're used to seeing this in a simulated environment, whether it's the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, which is a large pool at Johnson Space Center with a mock-up of Space Station, or inside VR facilities where you're seeing these kinds of things happen. But to be there for real is pretty mind-expanding when you're doing it in real life.
I really can't imagine, but I do enjoy watching videos of it from my living room.
There you go. I recommend it. If you get a chance, I'd jump on an opportunity.
I am trying to prod my children.
There you go.
Because it's much more relevant to their future as well. And let's look to the future, actually. The next generation of space exploration. You mentioned a few times, and I was really excited to hear that MDA will be developing Canadarm3, which will fly on the upcoming Lunar Gateway. I'm just wondering if you could fill us in a little bit more on the Gateway itself and how this links to Canada's participation in the Artemis program, which is focused on the moon, and MDA's role with that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's a step-by-step process. Not really your question, but going way back, we first launched the very first person into space. First Yuri Gagarin did as a Russian, and then Alan Shepard as a U.S. astronaut. We weren't even sure if you could swallow in space. When we first landed something on the moon, we thought maybe it's going to land in 30 feet of dust and disappear. Like, we knew nothing. And then over time, we built the space shuttle and we learned this capability. And then we worked closely with our Russian partners on the Shuttle Mir program for their Mir space station. We built the International Space Station with an amazing team that has this operating today. So we've got a permanent presence in space of human astronauts for 21 years. And we've learned a ton about life support and what it really takes to live and work in a zero-G environment. And so now we're going back to the moon. And one of those building block steps is to build Lunar Gateway, which is essentially a miniaturized version of the International Space Station that, instead of 400 kilometers away, like the International Space Station, Lunar Gateway is 400,000 kilometers away. And it will be occupied only part of the time. And what that means is that we have to design Gateway in such a manner that allows a lot of autonomous operations. And a lot of those operations will be external to this space station, this Lunar Gateway. And that means that with our robotics system, we need to make sure that anything that happens outside, whether it's doing maintenance or pulling out and putting in payloads, or when we have crew members on board and there's a need for a spacewalk, putting a crew member on the end of the arm, we have all of those capabilities built into it. And we're taking it a step farther, even beyond the artificial intelligence that's going to be required for that autonomy. We're going to have a second small arm that maintains the big arm. So it's a complete ecosystem of end-to-end logistics that has it's really part of the Canadarm3 program and our responsibility to contribute to this international effort. And that will lead to putting astronauts back on the surface of the moon. And over time, so for your kids, they'll probably be one of those astronauts that's spending 4 months at a time on the lunar surface and then handing it off to the next Canadian who comes up. It'll be exciting times for sure.
I hope so. Right now, I can't really convince them to ever leave home, but I'm sure they'll change their mind when they get older, or they'll be in my basement, and that's okay. You mentioned that the Canadarm3 will work autonomously, and AI and autonomy is a topic that we cover at Ploughshares a lot, but from a defense perspective. And I'm curious about how it works in space and what it means in space. It's just sort of beyond my scope of expertise and comprehension.
Well, it's also a building block approach, and we're learning a ton right now on the International Space Station. We've been working on a mission applications computer that's on Space Station. We've repurposed a computer that we had on board to do a lot of automatic or autonomous operations, and not really in an AI basis, but knowing that this arm, when it moves, you have to be able to predict where it goes and also the motion of this arm, because it has so many degrees of freedom. You can't just assume that you know exactly how the arm moves. And that's important with a very complex structure like the International Space Station. You have to make sure that there's clearance. And to be able to automate a lot of those procedures, what that equates to is reduction in the processes that are required on the ground for the ground crews and the engineers and the support to make sure that it's a safe trajectory for that arm. So take that to the next level on Lunar Gateway. For all those operations that I mentioned, whether it's maintenance or for payloads, we need to be able to do those operations in a way that is safe for the structure and one where we have very, very high level of confidence that it can be done safely and to completion.
Okay, so there's a reason why I work on the policy side and you work on the engineering and robotics side. What's next? What does the future look like? I know we're talking about Canadarm 3 as sort of the next big thing in space for MDA, but I'm sure as a company, you're looking even further down the road at where you might go and where you might play a role in this really rapidly growing and changing space-based economy.
Yeah, for sure. And one area that we're very excited about is coupling the design and build of Canadarm 3, the two arms, the large arm that does the maintenance and all the tasks that I mentioned, and the small arm that maintains the big arm, but putting a very particular focus on that small arm so that it's common with a commercial arm. And so using that commercial product that can be used for a wide variety of applications, whether it's active debris removal or the commercial low Earth observation or low Earth orbit destinations, like I mentioned with Axiom. There may be others as well. Perhaps augmenting spacecraft, doing in-space assembly, extending the life of satellites. So we see lots of opportunities here when it comes to robotics and the expertise that we've established over the last few decades with over 3 million hours of operations dedicated to on-orbit robotic space operations, a legacy that we're very proud of and really one that no one else can brag about at this point.
I was just going to say, I always describe MDA as one of the best in Canada, but I think really we need to start saying one of the best in the world when it comes to space-based robotics. So,
absolutely.
Note to self.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, and I'm partial being part of MDA and having robotics and space operations, but we definitely lead the pack, and it's a well-earned and hard-earned reputation because human spaceflight is a very demanding environment, and we've been there to support space shuttle and space station operations, and proud of that opportunity that we've had.
I do want to shift back to Earth really quickly. I know a lot of people lament sometimes that we invest so much, or for some people so little, but we invest so much in space technology. And I'm wondering if you could speak briefly to the impacts that this kind of investment and the development of these capabilities have here on Earth. How does it translate to other benefits that people like me here in Canada might enjoy?
Yeah, for sure. Like some of those people that are lamenting might be texting on their iPhone, which has technology that came from our space program, and driving in their car, being navigated by their GPS, which is part of our space program, and using miniaturized electronics, which comes from our space program. So there's plenty of dots to connect between what modern life is like and the impetus that really started back at the Apollo program. A lot of the industries we have that are from Silicon Valley through the world that have to do with modern electronics and capabilities that we use on Earth are really directly connected to the space program. And, I think one of the things that many people just aren't aware of what we do on the International Space Station is the basic and fundamental scientific research that will have phenomenal impact to how we live on planet Earth. And one of the challenges, frankly, when it comes to scientific research on the International Space Station, which is a designated U.S. laboratory, the challenge is that when you do basic and fundamental science, it's little building blocks along the way. It's not like you don't get home runs with that kind of scientific research. There are nonlinearities in terms of what you learn, and there's also building blocks that move along the way. So it's not like you invest in an International Space Station and then therefore you cure cancer. But what you learn about is you learn how does fluid flow really work from a basic physics standpoint, which has implications in medicine and in all kinds of industries. Anything that has a fluid, we learn more, and then we can create efficiencies. or combustion by examining combustion in a zero-G environment, which sounds kind of funny, burning things in space, which I did on my previous mission. But you learn about combustion, and what that means is perhaps you can create processes that are 10, 20% more efficient, which creates less of a need for petroleum products. And then the medical learnings from this, by and large, when we're on board space station, the crew members are experiments because zero gravity has really negative effects on the human body, on our bone density, our muscle strength, our eye function. And we have studied this so much in detail that I'm confident there's lessons learned that will be directly applicable to people with osteoporosis or macular degeneration or glaucoma and other things. So it's just a long path when you do scientific research. And then to me, what's even more clear in terms of that connection with space is the technology that we develop and what that means in terms of the quality of life on planet Earth.
Wow, that is a story that doesn't get told, I think, well enough. It's so much more than Teflon and Velcro, which are important.
And Tang, but I don't even have Tang anymore. Yeah.
I mean, that's my childhood.
There you go.
Let's redirect the conversation towards the topic of sustainability, because you have brought this up. In the news recently, I think all over the world, was the incident in May where there was a puncture that was noticed on the Canadarm 2 caused by a piece of space debris. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us more about the incident and whether or not debris incidents like this are common on the International Space Station?
Yeah, for sure. So there was a small impact on Canadarm 2. And I didn't realize this until we went through a very thorough investigation that allowed us to return Canadarm 2 to full normal operations. That arm, as will the Canadarm 3 be, is really robust. You could have, I won't say the exact amount, but a pretty massive hole in that arm, and it would still be 100% functional. So it's designed to be very robust. But your point is, what about other impacts on space station? And there have been some on some of the handrails. When you crawl over space station on a spacewalk, you're mobile by your two hands. So your hands are your mobility system. And so if you had a small meteor impact on a handrail with a sharp edge that could cut your glove, and that's a big deal. So we have to be very conscious of that. We've seen some small impacts on our solar arrays that provide power, and it's something that we just have to be very conscious of. The thing about the inside of space station, the pressurized modules where the crew members live, which is about the size of a 3 or 4 bedroom house. It's a pretty massive structure in space that the astronauts live on. It's designed because of these debris shields to protect about a large marble and smaller. So if an object yay big were to hit space station, the living volume, then these debris shields are designed, they disperse the energy. And it's been very well tested, just like Canadarm 2 was. We know with pretty clear definition how robust Canadarm 2 is and how robust the living volume is. And then there are assets in space that track, and from the ground, that track things that are about a baseball and larger. So really, you're exposed between a baseball and a marble in terms of size. And so the crew is trained, if there's a depressurization event, what exactly you do to isolate the leak, and then if you can't isolate it, to pack up, get inside your spaceship, and come back home. So we're trained for that, and it's not possible for us to know every little piece of debris in space, and that is a danger. And it's a future worry as we expand the number of satellites in space. How do we do this in a very responsible way? And there are certainly policy implications in terms of making all that work as the volume of items in space begins to increase.
Are you changing, or are you aware of any changes to the way that preparations for protection from debris are shifting as the problem increases, or are we hoping for the best and trying to really mitigate it from an environmental perspective rather than a safety on the ISS perspective?
Well, from an ISS perspective, we have the debris protection. There are assets that identify debris, and sometimes we have to move space station because of that debris. So that's happened several times, and there are other times when they would call it, a conjunction event where there's not time to move station, and so the crew will pack up and go to their spaceship with the hatch closed just in case there is an impact. So, it's a risk. So from a space station perspective, we have procedures and we have the hardware protections in place. But the broader context is what happens when we have another 42,000 satellite constellation or another 30,000 constellation. It's going to be a big challenge, and there needs to be a better solution as we go forward, to be quite frank.
Well, and if we think about solutions, MDA Technology is also investing in that side of the equation. You've been contracted to develop a whole host of satellite servicing capabilities that make use of these, decades of experience with space-based robotics. Can you speak to this and the role that robotics and servicing might play in sustainability in the long term?
Sure. If you mean sustainability, you mean maintaining a low Earth or higher orbit environment in such a manner that there aren't collisions and there isn't increased debris. I think the bigger aspect of that is going to be in large measure regulatory, but there's a burgeoning market right now for on-orbit servicing and assembly and maintenance. And so we're very interested in being the leader in that market. When it comes to debris, there has to be, someone has to close the business case, and with our customers, we have to close the business case that makes it worthwhile to bring that debris back. I think one of the most important developments is a requirement for anybody that puts an object in space to have, in order for them to have the spectrum for a satellite, for example, to demonstrate they have the capacity to get that satellite out of orbit. And what that in turn means is having additional fuel so that at end of life, they can deorbit that satellite. I think that's really important as we go forward. And then I think what's also interesting is that at some point in time, you can see a future where there's liability established with your satellite. And so there could be even a burgeoning insurance industry that says, hey, for us to insure your satellite, you need to be able to demonstrate that you can deorbit it. And, there could be liability if someone has some sort of conjunction event. And I think we need to go there, frankly, because, for every time that there is a collision, it's not just a disabling of a satellite, it creates more debris, right? And, you can envision this dystopian future that's like WALL-E with, a huge debris field around the planet. We don't want to go there. We want to make sure that we maintain a workable area around our planet.
Great. And you just pointed to a role for both government and private sector. So I know lots of people in the audience are probably cheering your answer right now. And so that's a really great way to transition into talking about governance. And that's the focus of my work day to day. So I really can't have you here and miss an opportunity to ask you a few questions about this, but about how the role of industry fits in. And we've been talking about the role of advanced robotics and satellite servicing and debris removal. But is there a governance framework in place for this? I think on Tuesday of this week, Kazuto Suzuki, who is in the audience today, he was on the main SpaceWatch Cafe talk, speaking from Japan's perspective and from the example of companies such as Astroscale and how they're going to progress to being able to use capabilities such as debris removal in a way that is safe and sustainable. And I'm wondering if you've given thought to whether or not the rules are currently in place to make these activities feasible and to make you confident in developing the services going forward.
I am not a policy expert, but I can just give you a layman's impression, and that is that other than what I had mentioned of a requirement to demonstrate a capability to deorbit in order to get spectrum with a satellite, it feels a lot like the Wild West. And, my concern would be that it would take, an incident of some sort of collision to really get things off the dime. I think that would be too late. And I think that also needs to be balanced with free market, right? You don't want to have onerous regulations that limit growth necessarily, but at the same time, you need to preserve an environment in which we can have this continued capacity to work and live in space. And so to the extent that someone's activities inhibit that, then we need to create a structure around that to make sure that we can maintain a future that allows us to build things in space, because there's all kinds of opportunities in terms of clean energy from space and manufacturing in space. And those won't be enabled if we don't protect the, I'll use the word loosely, environment, but really the space in order to be able to have that kind of activity.
Yes, so I know you're not a policy person, and my next question might kind of come as a surprise to somebody whose business really is to build things in space, and it's focused on dual-use capabilities. Many advanced robotics that are being developed to do really cool things, such as satellite servicing and debris removal, could also potentially be used in harmful ways. And, this week we've been watching, I think many of us in awe, as Chinese astronauts arrived to their brand new sparkling space station. And at the same time, others have been describing capabilities such as their own robotic arm as potentially threatening. And, in social media, there's been talk about, well, what about Canada's arm? And I'm wondering if you ever worry that someone will misinterpret your capabilities in space, and how industry thinks about this and maybe navigates the potential for perceptions and misperceptions about what's happening and what kind of activities we're doing when we...
Yeah, for sure. What we're focused on is Canadarm 3, and what is really an international collaboration as part of Lunar Gateway and as part of the Artemis Accords, which I think is super exciting. You look at the relationship that the United States, for example, has had with Russia, even back in the days of the Soviet Union, when tensions were at their absolute peak. We had astronauts and cosmonauts screening each other, and since then there's been an awesome relationship. And we've built an international space station together. I've spent cumulatively years in Russia, and I have many cosmonaut friends who spend equal amount of time in the United States, and it builds relationships at the individual level, which I think is super important. And I see the Artemis Accords as really an extension of that kind of international cooperation. And so what we look at with respect to Canadarm 3 is these commercial opportunities that I had mentioned before. There are many, many applications in the civil world for our robotic arms, and that's really the business case that we're focused on.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn more specifically to Canadian policy, which might be a new area for you. So I'll leave it as a wide-ended question, but the first guest that I had on Space Café Canada was David Kendall, and he lamented that Canada is not doing enough to leverage space-based capabilities in Canada, and also to be more of an active participant in space. And so I'm wondering, if you had your wish for Canadian policy or Canadian regulation, what would you want to see?
Yeah, so I didn't hear Dave's comments, so I'm not specifically clear on what he was lamenting about. I think that, in terms of business and regulation, right, oftentimes they're at odds. And so I think that there has to be a very balanced approach, not to overemphasize the need for collaboration and cooperation when it comes to mitigating the chances for space debris. I think that's where the focus needs to be. But we certainly shouldn't have regulation for regulation's sake. And, that is a danger among some policy people, to be quite frank. They view the world from regulatory requirement. And what we need to do is look at, in my opinion, we need to focus on what is the commercial opportunity and what is the required piece to make sure that we optimize the free market in that environment. Because the consequence of that approach, as opposed to onerous regulations on business, is that in the first case, where you focus free market and then you have regulatory pieces to make sure that people work well and companies work well with each other and internationally, what that does is it fosters growth in terms of business, and that translates to high technology jobs within Canada, within the robotic ecosystem, whereas the opposite will inhibit growth, and it will, it in turn, when there's market opportunity, that market will go to a different country. So I think that policymakers have to be careful to maintain a free market approach and always consider what is the kind of policy that will enable further growth and protect that growth and minimize negative impacts of the rapid growth in the space market. And a lot of that has to do around debris. So to me, that is, it's much more important to be laser focused on what is important instead of a broad swath. If we were to be laser focused on how to minimize debris, then I think that would be a success case.
Yeah, I think David would have fully agreed with you. And his lamentation was more that we're not doing enough, that space isn't prioritized enough at the cabinet level, where we have, everyone focusing on it because it connects to so many pieces of daily life in Canada.
For sure. And when it comes to international communities, the way that you affect change is with leadership, right? So Canada has an opportunity to be a leader there in many ways. And so it would be really cool to watch Canada take the lead on how do we maintain this environment in space that allows us to have a burgeoning market there.
Absolutely. I am going to provide a few minutes to take audience questions because they're starting to pile up, and people always think of much more interesting things to ask because they come from so many different walks of space life, if you will. And I see one question really picks up on your point earlier, which was about the role of cooperation, particularly for Canadian robotics developers in space. And so someone was wondering, as a country that is so well versed in space robotics, do we think that there is an opportunity for Canada and China to collaborate at some point in the future, given parallel interests and the development of parallel capabilities? Now, that's probably beyond your day-to-day job requirement to think about. So it's more personal reflections.
I think what's in the interest of a country and what's in the interest of a company is to maintain their intellectual property and to partner with people where you can have confidence and trust in that partnership. And so I would say that any sort of partnership internationally has to be founded on trust, and trust is built over time, and it's possible to erode trust based upon actions. So whoever we partner with has to have demonstrated that they're a good actor in the space community. And when someone is not a good actor, if someone were to create a debris field, for example, I think that's a demonstration of not being a good player in the space industry. Or if you can't trust that your technology is safe with your partner, then in turn, that would not be someone you want to partner with. So regardless of who the country is, I think that you have to have strong international relations with them and have a relationship that is founded on trust.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to live in real time scroll through the questions and make them flow in a logical way. Someone else on the point of partnership, somebody asked sort of what other key areas of partnerships MDA might be interested in pursuing in the future. And I'm assuming that's from like a technological perspective.
I'm sorry, you're saying other areas to partner with, or
what kind of partnerships? I'm guessing private sector partnerships MDA might be interested in pursuing down the line.
Super exciting area because there is no single company that does it all, right? And space is tough. It is super tough. I think that, we've gotten a little bit too enamored with successes, and we forget that it is a really challenging environment to get to and then to work in. So what that means in terms of collaboration and cooperation, you have to have a launch partner. You need to have a platform partner for a robotic arm. You need to have perhaps a ground station partner, an operational partner. And then as we go to the moon, which I'm super excited about, I'm hoping someday that I can watch Canadian astronauts walk on the surface of the moon. That's going to require a lot of collaboration as well, because, if you fast forward, say, 10 years or 15 years from now, I'm really hoping that we see the fruition of the Artemis program, which is a fully sustainable and maybe even permanent presence on the lunar surface, kind of like what we've done on the International Space Station. And that requires an entire infrastructure to support that. Vehicles for moving around logistics and people, a habitat that sustains life, maybe pressurized vehicles so we can go explore the moon. And even better would be our ability to have a sustainable ecosystem there, growing our own food, using the water that's on the moon. So it is such a complex challenge that it'll require all of industry and their focus in order to make that happen. So I'm super excited about the future when it comes to our niche, which is space robotics, and really expanding that, including our vision systems and sensors capability, expanding that within the market and working closely with trusted business partners.
Excellent. And a few people, going back to, I think, the story you were telling us about what happens when there's debris risks, a few people have questions about how does MDA monitor potential risks to the Canadarm itself? And also, are there sort of no-go positions to prevent collisions with the ISS?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, when you look at videos, and they're usually sped up because the arm moves fast, but you look at these videos of the arm moving around and doing these amazing things, what you don't see up front is all of the planning that went into making that happen, the trajectory for how that works, and how you get from position A to position B, and the backup plan if a component on that arm were to fail, and the spacewalk training that the crew members have in order to replace those items. I mean, the contingencies that are in place, we make it look super easy, which is almost to our detriment, but it's not. It's super hard. I'm really grateful I had this opportunity to fly in space a couple of times and spend 8 months in space. But I tell you what, it's work. And it's work for the entire team to make this happen. And the reason we do is because we're just so passionate about the importance of human spaceflight and what that means to for space exploration as a whole. But it is tough work. And so every time you see one of these robotic operations, you can think back to the 100-fold hours that went into making those operations occur.
I will. I definitely will. We were talking earlier about sort of human versus robotic capabilities, and someone had a question about the dexterity of a spacesuit compared to the dexterity of Dexter or some of the other robotic capabilities that are being developed. Do hands and fingers beat robots when it comes to detailed tasks in space? Or yeah, sure. I'm also going to say, or on surgery here on Earth.
Yeah, it's really hard to replace the human brain and the dexterity that our body has. We've developed a really amazing set of robots on the International Space Station. And to your point, the special purpose dexterous manipulator, its ability to sense touch and then to be able to maneuver in such a manner to grab on to objects is completely unprecedented, especially in space. But the dexterity that you have with your hand, you don't even think about it, right? And so our body is a really amazing machine. It's going to be a long time until engineers and scientists are able to even come close to that capability. And even more importantly is the things we don't even think about, what we see and how we process that information, and then how we use our body to execute that task. The human body and brain is really the most amazing piece of hardware in the space solution, and it's a vital piece. And what's important is for us to figure out what tasks can we divide out to the robotics and automation world, and what needs to be reserved back to the human world. It reminds me a little bit when I was working on the Comanche helicopter program. And helicopters, if you go way back, 100% manual flying, and your brain only has a little bit of bandwidth to do the mission, which was reconnaissance. Whereas the whole objective with the Comanche was to flip the equation, and that was put 70+% of your brain power and your own personal bandwidth into doing the mission, and then only about 30% into flying the vehicle. So where it makes sense, what we do is we transition the tasks to the mechanisms and the software, and that gives us the capacity to do the higher order skills. And you see that happening on Earth too, in terms of like Amazon fulfillment centers or warehouse inventory management, things like that. We'll find ways to apply the automation and robotics to the things that are best suited for that, and then we can use the high order skills applied to our own capacity.
There's quite a few questions on debris, and I know we talked about that quite a bit earlier. So I'll note Kevin has a question. I'm just going to reframe some of them to pick up where we left off. So if we're thinking about the debris risk to operations low Earth orbit, I'm wondering, does it change, or what does it look like if you're trying to operate in lunar orbit? Are the environmental challenges the same, or are they different?
They are different, and I have some expertise, but not a lot of expertise here. A lot of the debris that you have around the planet is man-made, obviously. We put it there and it stays in orbit until it doesn't. If it's in a low orbit, it degrades and it burns up in the atmosphere. If it's higher, then it stays there for a much longer period of time, and then it degrades over, decades, hundreds of years kind of thing. Or if it's high enough, it stays in a graveyard, because they'll move satellites to essentially this elephant graveyard of satellites. So there's that man-made component. There really is little, frankly, no man-made debris around the lunar orbit. But then there's the unknown piece. When you go out at night and you see that shooting star, well, it's a piece of the universe that has traveled across the solar system and has burned through our atmosphere. Like, we didn't know, we weren't tracking that little thing that was, orbiting around the sun. The same is true in a lunar orbit. There's going to be debris there. I would say that, perhaps from a debris perspective, you have lower risk, but less defined. And so, we'll on Lunar Gateway, we'll have a very similar set of mitigating factors in terms of design. We'll have debris shields. We'll have crews that are trained on what to do if there is an impact. We'll live on the lunar surface. We'll have habitats that have that level of protection. What would be really cool is for us to build habitats someday in lava tubes that have 20, 30 meters worth of ground in between, and provides us radiation protection and also debris protection. That would be cool. And I hope we see that in the next couple of decades.
Yeah, I told my kids not to barge in at all today, but I'll make sure they see the video to start imagining what life might look like beyond the planet for them.
For sure.
I can't have let Kazuto stay up half the night without asking his question. And it is another policy one, because he and I both work on space governance together. But we've been talking a lot about sort of the future of humanity on the moon, the importance of international cooperation and partnerships. And he's asking if there would be any interest or a need for developing norms or rules for how you use some of the technologies on the moon, such as the robotic arm, especially if there's different, I'm guessing different groups of activities taking place at the same time on the moon.
Yeah, to me, so I kind of believe in the free market. And so when I hear thoughts about regulation in terms of how you use your robotics. Seems like pretty not free market. So, that would be my personal preference. And I think that as problems come up, just like in the space debris example, when someone's actions can impact the successful use for all, then there's certainly a place for regulation. And if there's an example that falls in that category, then that would be something to investigate. But we should also try to maximize the ability for us to have an economic model. Because currently on the moon, there is no free market model. When we say commercial, it's really about governments funding activity on the moon. But I think what would be really cool is if we found economic reasons for us continuing our activity on the moon. And, from a space policy standpoint, that either means having economic benefit that you derive from the moon, or if you can't have that, then you have this ability to sustain your presence there based upon the resources you have. And so one of those two ways is the mechanism to have a sustainable human presence on the lunar surface. And then conversely, if you don't have that, it might be an unfortunate outcome like the Apollo program, which did amazing things, but it was sort of, touch, go, come home and don't come back. I think we want to have a system in place that enables us to keep on doing more on the lunar surface.
Yes, and I think I have time for one more question. There's a lot of questions and they're great ones. I'm going to ask Ashley's question because I know that this is a favorite topic in the Canadian space industry. And it's whether or not I'm asking you because you're in the private industry and you might hear more than people like I do, but whether or not there's been additional movement towards Canada having its own launch capability, and not having that launch capability, I know is something that so many Canadians in the space industry lament. So do we seem to be moving towards investing in that, or are we going to continue to make use of really all of the international opportunities that are available for launch?
Yeah, I'm sorry to finish the questions, Jessica, with something I really don't have any sort of good knowledge base about. But what I would say is that although there's been a reduction in reduction in the cost of access to space, that space infrastructure requires phenomenal level of investment. It was only a piece of the overall program, but back in the space race days, United States, going from Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, 4.5% of the U.S. national budget went into space. That's pretty eye-watering.
Yeah.
And a portion of that was 39A and 39B, the two launch pads the Apollo missions launched from, and then the follow-on launch pads for the Space Shuttle program. And now one of those converted for SpaceX launches. It's a phenomenal investment. And so if Canada is willing to do that, and the positioning of that launch site is conducive with the kinds of orbits that it produces, then I'd be all for it. But, it's really a question of national investment. And it's difficult to understand a business case for it in and of itself. So you brought up public-private partnerships. I think that's certainly something that needs to be part of the space industry story for at least the next decade.
Well, I like that answer because it leaves us on a bit of a cliffhanger. Wait and see, keep watching, keep tuned in, and wait and find out. I think we're just about at the hour, and I know you probably have more meetings, if not lunch, lined up for 1 o'clock. So I want to thank you for taking the time today to speak to us. And again, I think that ability to bring together a perspective on human space exploration and a perspective on the development of robotic capabilities is unique, and it was well worth listening to today. So I can say goodbye to you, and I can turn it over to Kiara if she wants to wrap us up as well. And thanks, thank you also to the audience for your questions. They were wonderful.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for participating. A lot of fun. Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks, you. Kiara. And Kiara, over to you. Thanks. Bye, Tim.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Tim and Jessica, for this absolutely fascinating talk. It was really wonderful to listen in. Before I briefly tell you about our upcoming events, I'd actually like to get all of your input on something, which is the future structure of our Space Café events. So you can see a poll popping up on your screen now, because we would like to improve the networking opportunities we have. So please just take a second to give your answer to this poll. So do you think social networking platforming following our Space Cafe events is something you would appreciate in the future? Just quickly leave your answer here.
I love these polls.
It's always fun.
Well, we're spread out so far, and yet you'll get a nice consolidated answer to a question.
Yeah, so I think if we have some answers coming in, I can then start telling you about the wonderful events that we have coming up in the future. So next week on Tuesday, the 22nd of June at 4 p.m. CST, first we'll be talking to Danica Remy, who is the co-founder of Asteroid Day and president of the Asteroid Foundation. So that's going to be really interesting. And just a day later, on Wednesday, on the 23rd of June, we have our Space Cafe Brazil with Ian Grossner, talking with a Brazilian diplomat, André Ripple, and this will be in Portuguese. The week after that, on the 29th of June at 4 p.m. CST, we have our 33 Minutes with Nicholas Ninas, where Torsten and Nicholas will be discussing Europe's role in the new space race. That's very interesting. And then on the 1st of July at 4 p.m. CST, we have our next Space Cafe Scotland, in which Angela Mathis will be hosting a lively talk on the key outcomes of the Sustainable Space Challenges campaign with a bunch of wonderful speakers. Following that, on the 6th of July at 1 p.m. CEST, we have our 33 Minutes with Professor Enrico Stoll of the TU Berlin. And on the 8th of July at 4 p.m. CEST, we have our next Space Cafe Germany by Andreas Schäfer with the German rocket star Daniel Metzler of ISAR Aerospace, which will be hosted in German. So all our events are going to be online on Eventbrite. And as always, we would love to hear your feedback. So please check in with us on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And don't forget to sign up for our daily and bi-weekly newsletters of SpaceWatch.Global. And if you'd like to treat yourself to something special, become a Space Watcher today. Your support really helps us greatly. So take out your credit card and visit our fan shop at shop.spacewatch.global. I know we say this often, but we do need your support to continue this work. And then, thank you to all of you in the audience for being here today, for asking so many questions. It was a really nice discussion. And then again, thank you to Jessica and Tim for such an inspiring talk and being our guest. Thank you to the entire team behind the scenes for doing this great job week in and week out. And also thank you to ESA Space Solution for their great support. So with that, I hope you all stay safe and stay healthy. And thank you for joining us today. I hope to see you next week and the week after. And in the meantime, visit our website and follow us on social media. And don't forget, become a Space Watcher. Thank you very much.